Lucas was an adrenaline junkie. He was the type to chase storms, dive into caves, and scale cliffs without a second thought. Danger thrilled him. Terror was just another high. So when he heard about a town with a mysterious hum that only a few people could hear, he was intrigued. That same day, he started packing his bag and called his friend Caleb. "Come on, we're going to Lysra." Caleb was his partner in crime, a talented videographer. If Lucas's adventures were famous, most of the credit went to Caleb's expertly shot videos. They reached Lysra the next day. Lucas could hardly contain his excitement, but since it was already night, they decided to call it a day. They planned to explore the town and talk to the locals the following morning. They spent the entire next day trying to talk to the locals, but most remained disinterested. They learned that not everyone could hear the hum, only a few. Sometimes, it was just a buzzing. Other times, it felt like a woman singing. It would start and stop at random, and those who heard it felt like they were going insane. It was like a migraine that wouldn't go away. However, no one seemed to know where it came from or what its origin was. After a couple of days, they still hadn't uncovered any new information. Everyone kept repeating the same story. Lucas and Caleb began to wonder why they couldn't hear the hum themselves. They wondered if this was a trick to attract tourists to the town. One evening, as they stood near the town square having a smoke, an old man passed by. He glanced at them casually, and in response, Caleb and Lucas gave him a friendly wave. For a moment, the old man looked as if he had seen a ghost. Then, without a word, he hurried away. Lucas found this strange. Without hesitation, he ran after the old man, calling out, "Hey, stop, wait, please talk to us." The old man turned around, fear in his eyes, and said, "You shouldn't have come to this town. Please pack your bags and leave now." Lucas was taken aback. "Why? How do you know we are new here?" The old man's voice grew urgent. "If you want to live, please leave now." Lucas couldn't believe what he was hearing. He threw up his hands, shaking his head in disbelief. This man must be crazy. Without another word, he turned and walked away, hearing the old man scoff before disappearing into the night. That evening, Caleb and Lucas sat in their room, convinced the hum was just a hoax, and the old man was out of his mind. Eventually, they shrugged it off and went to sleep. Around midnight, Lucas was jolted awake by Caleb shaking him violently. "Luke, get up. Do you hear it? Luke, come on." Lucas groaned, rubbing his eyes. "What the hell, Caleb?" Then he heard it. A low, droning hum filled the room, vibrating through the walls, slipping into his bones. It wasn't coming from outside. It was everywhere, surrounding them, seeping into the air itself. Caleb's face was pale, his breathing uneven. "It started a few minutes ago. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then it changed." Lucas sat up, his pulse quickening. "Changed how?" Caleb swallowed hard. It started sounding like a voice, a woman's voice, and I think it's calling us out." They sat together on the bed, listening, their bodies tense. A shiver ran down both their spines. The hum wasn't just a sound. It felt like it was pulling them, beckoning them outside, urging them to go somewhere. But they fought the urge. They look at each other, horror filled in their face, but both don't utter a single word. Minutes passed, yet the hum only grew stronger, more insistent. Then, without warning, Caleb stood up, his movements eerily mechanical as if he were possessed. Without a word, he walked toward the door. "Caleb!" Lucas shouted, scrambling after him. "Wait, where are you going?" Caleb didn't respond. He just kept walking. Panic surged through Lucas. He sprinted ahead, blocking Caleb's path, and grabbed his shoulders, shaking him violently, like trying to wake someone from a nightmare. Caleb's body went limp. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to the ground. Lucas caught Caleb before he hit the ground, holding him up as he frantically shook him and tapped his cheeks. "Caleb, please wake up," he cried, his voice laced with panic. Desperate, he shouted for help, but before he could get a response, Caleb's eyes fluttered open. He gasped, like someone waking from a deep sleep. Relief flooded through Lucas as he pulled Caleb into a hug. "Bro, what the hell was that?" Caleb muttered, still dazed. They sat there, their chests rising and falling rapidly, their bodies still trembling from fear. Then, out of nowhere, laughter bubbled up between them, nervous, shaky, but real, because what else could they do? They sat in stunned silence, struggling to process what had just happened. Then it hit them. The hum was gone. As their breathing steadied, they exchanged thought, describing the strange pull they had felt. Had others experienced the same overwhelming urge? Or was their reaction different? Now more determined than ever, they decided to question the townspeople again. This time, they had real insight. Something beyond mere rumors. And one thing was certain. They needed to find that old man. He knew something, and they intended to find out what. The next day, they spoke with townspeople who had experienced the hum. Some described it as a relentless migraine, while others compared it to the static of a phone. However, no one had felt it the way Caleb and Lucas had. As evening fell, they waited near the town square, hoping to spot the old man again. After an hour of waiting, they finally spotted the old man walking across the street. Without hesitation, they ran toward him, calling out. The old man turned. As soon as he spotted them, he shakes his head in disbelief and shouts, "Why are you still here? I told you to leave this town." Lucas stepped forward. "Why? Why do we need to leave?" The old man narrowed his eyes. "Have you heard the hum?" Lucas nodded. "Yes, last night." At this, the old man exhaled sharply, running a trembling hand across his forehead. He sighed, his expression twisted with unease, as if struggling to find the right words. Then, without looking at them, he muttered, "It's not too late. Leave before night falls." Frustration flared in Lucas. His voice rose. "What is with all the secrecy? Why won't you just tell us the truth?" The old man stood there in silence, his gaze distant. Caleb and Lucas exchanged exasperated looks, about to walk away when the old man finally spoke. "I cannot tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because if I spill the secret, I will be punished." The old man took a deep breath and continued. "But I also cannot have your death on my conscience." He points at Lucas. "Even if I must face punishment, I will tell you. But you must promise me, once you hear the story, you will leave this town." Lucas was surprised when the old man pointed directly at him, but his curiosity about the story kept him silent. He chose not to question it, at least, not yet. The old man starts the story. "Many years ago, this town was ruled by an earl who had the most beautiful daughter. They said the daughter, Lara, was a vision of divine beauty, her golden hair gleaming like the morning sun, her voice as enchanting as the sweetest melody. It was said that no heart could resist the warmth of her song. Many suitors sought her hand, but her heart belonged to a knight in her father's earldom. On their wedding night, as joy filled the air, the neighboring jealous king stormed their land. Chaos erupted. The people were slaughtered. Lara watched in horror as her father and her beloved knight fell to the king's blade. Taken captive, her body was beaten and abused, her spirit crushed in her own wedding ground. She was vengeful, and she did not let the king abuse her soul anymore. She ended her own life, with a shard of glass. But death did not free her. Her sorrow and rage bound her spirit to the ruins of the wedding grounds. The only thing she remembered were the piercing green eyes of her tormentor. So she sings, she hums. Rarely people hear this tune. However, anyone green eyes will continue hearing the tune, and they find themselves drawn towards the woods, toward the place where her love was stolen. Her song turns into a whisper of death. Few people in the town know this story, so we whisper warnings to anyone who is new here with green eyes. Yet, some are still drawn to the haunted woods, lured by the legend of the singing ghost. None can stop her. None can break the curse. So, you have started hearing the hum, since you are the one with green eyes. He points towards Lucas. Things will only worsen for you. You need to leave now. Lucas laughs. It is a fascinating story, but come on, a princess, a ghost who kills. Why haven't the deaths reported? Why isn't there a missing person case? The old man says, there is, but it rarely happens because there are no many people in the world with green eyes, isn't it? He then walks away muttering, I have said what I had to. If you want to live, get out. Caleb and Lucas stood in silence for a while, watching the old man disappear into the distance. Finally, Caleb let out a nervous laugh. Bro, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Lucas couldn't help but chuckle, and soon they were both laughing, though unease still lingered beneath their amusement. As they walked back to the hotel, they decided, tomorrow, they would look into the town's missing person cases. If the old man was telling the truth, they needed to know. That night, at midnight, Lucas jolted awake to a scream. A glass-shattering, blood-curdling scream. Heart-pounding, he shot up in bed, his breath ragged, but the room was silent. Nothing was out of place, and Caleb was still fast asleep, undisturbed. Lucas ran a hand down his face. A nightmare. It had to be. He lays back down, but sleep wouldn't come. With a sigh, Lucas stepped outside for a smoke. He leaned against a car parked in front of their room, taking a slow drag as his gaze drifted to the trees across the road. Something shifted in the woods. Frowning, he took a step forward, narrowing his eyes to get a better look. Then, the song began. This time, it was different, more melodious. A strange warmth spread through his chest, a comforting embrace rather than fear. He didn't just like the sound, he needed it. The melody filled him with something indescribable, as if every note held the key to a deeper truth he had long forgotten. And suddenly, he knew. If the song stopped, if he lost, he would lose himself. Without thinking, he took another step, then another. He had to follow it, so he follows. Before he knew it, he was deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but darkness. Then, the song stopped, like a spell breaking. He comes back to reality. His breath hitched as he looked around, realizing just how far he had wandered. A cold shiver crept up his spine. Panic took hold. He turned and bolted, but before he could get far, the melody returned. Only now, it wasn't beautiful. It was wrong. Twisted. A hollow, eerie hum, like the ghost of a long-forgotten princess whispering his name through the trees. His chest burned as he ran, but the hum only grew louder, chasing him, surrounding him. He skidded to a stop, gasping for air. His eyes darted around. He was no longer just lost in the woods, he was standing in the middle of ancient ruins. A horrifying realization gripped him. The wedding grounds. His breath caught in his throat. His body went numb. Then, movement. A shadow shifted behind a crumbling stone wall. It was coming closer. Lucas tried to run, but his legs refused to move. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came. The shadow stepped in front of him, cold, fingers wrapped around his neck, tightening, squeezing, and as his vision blurred, he heard it. A vengeful cackle echoing through the woods.